Thanks for joining us at this morning's IPSE's National Freelancers Day. My name is James Foster. I work at SJD Accountancy as a Senior Commercial Manager, and my colleague joining us today is Joanne Harris, who works as our Technical Commercial Manager.
Good morning, everyone.
So firstly, it'd be good to briefly mention who SJD Accountancy are for those that haven't heard of us. So we are the largest limited company accountancy firm in the UK. We specialise in contractors and freelancers. However, we do make up part of a larger group called the Optionist Group. All of the brands within the Optionist Group also focus on freelancers too, so ranging from umbrella companies to tax rebate services. So across the group, we have a wealth of experience in supporting freelancers or perhaps would-be freelancers today, such as yourselves. So today we're going to be running a short webinar that focuses primarily on the Good Work Plan and a couple of other areas that we think will be having a big impact in the freelancer industry. We'll then look at some of the current market insights and the impacts they'll be having on the future of freelancing based on the areas that we covered today. Now would be a good time to also add that on your screen, as well as the chat box, there's also a question box. So feel free to ask questions throughout the session. We'll try and answer a few maybe as we go along, but there is a 5-minute slot at the end for a Q&A. So yeah, ask as many questions as you like. Any questions that we don't get round to answering, we'll still answer after the session. So we'll ask IPSE to send these on to you directly. Alternatively, you can send Joe and I questions through the IPSE app. So if you haven't downloaded that, I'd suggest doing so. So moving into the webinar.
Thanks, James. Thank you all for coming to this early morning webinar, the first one of the day. Firstly, and this may be a question that you've asked yourself when you signed up for this webinar, I'm going to cover off what is the Good Work Plan. The Good Work Plan, in the government's own words, sets out their vision for the future of the UK labour market. And as such, we think there are many elements that will have a big impact on freelancers, contractors, and of course the wider recruitment industry. The Good Work Plan came about as a result of Matthew Taylor's independent review of modern working practices, which was published back in 2017. In this report, Matthew Taylor examined the issues within the UK labour market and made a number of recommendations to the government. This report and further government consultations which were launched after that informed the Good Work Plan, which was published back in December 2018. This saw the government accept the vast majority of the 53 recommendations made in the Taylor Review. And whilst the Good Work Plan is not legislation in itself, has been the catalyst for the introduction of many new pieces of legislation already, with many more likely to come. So, the highlights. Now, given that the Good Work Plan is quite a hefty document, it runs 68 pages and contains, as I said, 53 recommendations. We're only going to cover the highlights today. And by the highlights, I mean the points that we feel will have most impact on the contractor and freelancer community. The recommendations included in the Good Work Plan fall into 3 key areas, and they are fair and decent work, fairer enforcement, and clarity for employers and workers. So let's start off then with fair and decent work and addressing the issue of one-sided flexibility. Flexibility has been a key factor behind the success of the UK labour market. Our dynamic contingent workforce has massively contributed to economic success. However, Matthew Taylor found that some employers abuse the system, in his eyes, transferring too much risk onto the individual. The government accepted this and committed to bring forward legislation that would introduce a right for all workers, not just employees, to request more stable and predictable contracts after 26 weeks of service. Now, that's not to say that those workers are happy to be flexible or be forced to commit, but it is an option that's available for them to request. This would be particularly valuable for those employees on zero-hour contracts and gig economy workers that are looking for greater stability. So, move on next to the repeal of the SD model, which may require some explanation. So, SD model is the Swedish derogation model, and this relates specifically to if you've taken this out with an umbrella company or some direct agency payroll working. It all relates to the agency worker regulations that were introduced back in 2011 and arose from an EU directive. So the AWR regulations included the right for agency workers to receive the same pay as a permanent employee at the same client site. However, the UK government included an exemption which was proposed by Sweden, hence the name, which meant that an agency worker could waive their right to equal pay under AWR if they won a contract that offered them pay between assignments. This was repealed on the 6th of April 2020, and so now, as it stands, all workers that are engaged by an agency or umbrella company will have this right to pay parity after 12 weeks. I don't know how many of you have worked through an umbrella company before or intend to work through in the future, but it's certainly on the increase. We saw a sharp upturn in umbrella working after the introduction of the off-payroll reforms to the public sector back in 2017, and indeed in the run-up to the now postponed off-payroll reforms in the private sector. So many freelancers and contractors are opting to become employed by an umbrella company rather than become a zero rights employee under the off-payroll reforms. If you're offered this model, the three derogation model, it's no longer compliant and should raise a red flag really. So if you are working, involved in an umbrella company that offers you that option, it's a different umbrella company. This brings us nicely onto our next point on fairer enforcement and the regulation of umbrella companies. So as I've already mentioned, over the years there has been an increase in umbrella employment for freelancers. It may surprise you to learn that umbrella is not currently a regulated industry, and this lack of official regulation has meant it's been all too easy for non-compliant tax avoidance scheme providers to market themselves as compliant umbrella companies, to target freelancers and contractors with promises of 90% take-home pay and no paperwork. The old adage of if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is, would not be true here. No one can achieve this level of take-home pay through legitimate means. And ultimately, it's the contractor, it's the individual that pays the price. We've only got to look at what happened with the loan charge to see the devastating impact that getting caught up in these schemes can have. And the government committed to the regulation of umbrella companies in the publication of the Good Work Plan, and this is something that we welcome. Until then, and there's nothing forthcoming at the minute, so until it is regulated, if you do wish to use an umbrella company for an upcoming contract, we strongly recommend using an FCSA regulated company. We're regulated by FCSA ourselves and can attest to the rigorous audit that you need to go through annually to renew your membership. We recommend Parasol, our sister company, to our clients as their market leading umbrella company, but also founding members of the FCSA and industry leaders in both service and compliance. Okay, so let's look at the final section of the Good Work Plan then, and that's probably the most relevant for freelancers, clarity for employers and workers. So the first change that I wanted to discuss is the introduction of key information documents on the 6th of April this year. Originally termed key facts pages in the Good Work Plan, these documents outline the key facts of a worker's relationship with the employment business and recruitment agency, and crucially must include an example pay illustration. The employment business must provide key information documents to all work seekers prior to signing terms with the employment business. So you'll receive a key information document whenever you look for an assignment through an employment business, and whether you operate through your own limited company, sometimes called a personal service company, opt to be engaged by an umbrella company, or on agency direct payroll. The government introduced this new legislation with the aim of improving transparency, particularly around pay. It was found by Matthew Taylor that some agency workers were unclear on the deductions that would be made from their agreed rates. We feel it's a really positive step. This provides much needed transparency for freelancers who are often provided with an assignment rate without necessarily understanding what deductions will be made from this rate. For example, a worker looking to access a role through an umbrella company will be able to see their assignment rate and the impact that any fees, taxes, other deductions such as auto and pension, employees' national insurance will have on their take-home pay before they commit to the assignment. Importantly, the key information document for working for a personal service company will only show deductions that are made by the employment business. So they won't show deductions that you pay for tax from your personal service company. So if you do need an illustration of what your likely take-home pay will be and you're operating for a personal service company, you are going to need to speak to an accountant. Otherwise, there are lots of good calculators online, SJD Accountancy, for example, We have some good calculators that will be able to give you an idea of your likely take-home pay. Perhaps the most important and universally welcomed recommendation that was included within the Good Work Plan was the recommendation of the alignment of employment status frameworks for the purposes of employment rights and tax, and the clarification of the dreaded employment status test that contracts and their accountants have been grappling with since the introduction of IR35 back in 2000. Mr. Clare also recommended that the tests that determine whether someone is self-employed or has worker rights should place more emphasis on control and less on the right to send a substitute. The government responded to both these recommendations by confirming that they will bring forward legislation to improve clarity on employment status. They also committed to bring forward detailed proposals on how the tax and rights frameworks will be aligned. The alignment of employment status and tax status would reduce scenarios where, for example, an individual is classed as an employee for tax purposes, but classed as self-employed for employment purposes. What you effectively get here is a zero rights employee, an individual that is being taxed in the same manner as an employee, but isn't receiving the same rights, benefits and protections as an employee, which Matthew Taylor very rightly highlighted is deeply unfair. However, almost 2 years on from the publication of the Good Work Plan, we're yet to see these proposals, and this misalignment leads us nicely on to our next slide, James.
Thanks, Joe. So the off-payroll working rules, commonly referred to as IR35, is one we probably could have spent a whole webinar on. However, we'll try and keep it fairly brief, as a lot of freelancers, especially limited company directors, are probably sick of hearing about it. However, if you do want to hear more about IR35, there's plenty of content and resources on SJD's website, and IPSE as well have recorded some brilliant webinars on it also, so check those out. So IR35 will be set to have a big impact on the freelancer industry, and specifically for those working through their own limited company. In short, if you are a contractor and IR35 applies, then your income will be subject to income tax and national insurance like an employee, which means directors can't pay themselves dividends from this income. Currently in the private sector, it's the contractor's responsibility to determine their IR35 status. However, they'll usually utilise the services of an accountant like SJD or a legal expert to review their contract for them. As mentioned on the screen, the private sector reform is set to take place in April 2021, where it's following suit with the public sector reform, which happened back in 2017. This will shift the responsibility of determining a worker's IR35 status from the individual to the client, and along with that responsibility will also be the cost of non-compliance. This is really an important point. As the public sector reform, there were reports of end clients making blanket inside IR35 decisions to effectively avoid that risk of non-compliance, rather than actually assessing a worker's status correctly. As a result, there's also worries that we may see examples of this within the private sector, but we'll wait and see. So the private sector reforms were scheduled to come into effect from April 2020 initially. However, considering the impact of COVID-19, the government delayed this until April 2021. Delaying this was sensible. However, there were widespread calls for this to be delayed by at least 2 years. And there's still a lot of campaigning, including from IPSE themselves, the current IR35 plans to be abolished altogether. One of the main reasons being, as Joe discussed on the last slide, it can create workers with a different tax status to their employment status. So, for example, their income is subject to PAYE and national insurance, similar to an employee, but they don't receive the same employee rights and benefits as them. As well as the Taylor Review, which we touched on, there was also a recent House of Lords review, which criticised the unfairness of IR35 and suggested it's re-reviewed. However, despite the criticisms, as it stands, there isn't a concrete plan to tackle the misalignment in employment and tax status. And there's also no current indication from the government that they won't be pressing ahead with this in April 2021. So whilst we're discussing IR35, it's also worth asking what you should be doing if you are working for your own limited company. Well, if we're looking at the big picture, what you could do if you wanted to help is to help IPSE's campaign to stop IR35 by writing to your local MP. You can also raise awareness through social media, for example, on Twitter, by using the hashtag #StopIR35. That can also help raise exposure. But on an individual level, it's also worth ensuring that you're well informed and you fully understand IR35, as despite the campaigns we just spoke about to stop it, it won't help to bury your head in the sands and hope for that outcome. You should also make sure that you understand the implications of IR35. So make sure you're aware of the different options available to you, like working for an umbrella company. This is where speaking to your accountant will really help, as they'll be able to help you understand the specific financial implications for you. So for example, they could do a comparison between your current rates versus what your contract would be if it was inside IR35. So they'll be able to help you understand what rate you should be looking for in different scenarios so you can ensure that your take home is still the same. Finally, you should speak to your end client. So especially once they've communicated out their decision, this is going to be one that's going to impact you negatively from a financial perspective. You may wish to have an open discussion to sort of try and keep your take-home pay still the same. I briefly mentioned COVID-19 was the reason why the IR35 private sector reform was delayed, so it's worth us discussing the impact of COVID-19. So we couldn't have done a webinar on factors that are having a big impact on freelancers without mentioning COVID-19, which is unfortunately having a detrimental impact on the whole of the UK and not just the freelancer industry. However, looking at how this has impacted freelancers specifically, so it's worth mentioning that whilst there are support schemes offered by the government, such as the coronavirus job retention scheme, the self-employed income support scheme, and there's grants and also bounce back loans, and all of these have been generous, and there's no doubt that there has been pockets of individuals that have been left out. Unfortunately, these aren't small pockets either, and a lot of these are self-employed individuals. So let's take a look at examples of some of these groups of self-employed individuals. So firstly, directors of limited companies. These are workers that are likely to receive the majority of their income in dividends. Dividends aren't taken into account for either scheme, so they won't receive support there. And directors also typically pay themselves a very small salary. So whilst they could qualify for support under the coronavirus job retention scheme, this won't provide much in monetary terms. Just to give you an idea of the scale of people missing out, it's estimated that there's around 700,000 directors that are impacted by this. There's also self-employed individuals with annual profits exceeding the 50,000 cap for the self-employment income support scheme. So they're ineligible for that support. It's worth noting as well that that 50k limit is a hard cutoff. So there'll be many scenarios where individuals have been seriously and adversely impacted by coronavirus, but they won't qualify for this support due to their previous income maybe just being slightly over the threshold. And then there's also those that are newly self-employed. So freelancers that have set up after April 2019 would not meet the eligibility criteria. So what has the overall impact of this all been? Well, on your screen, there are some figures from research that IPSE have done alongside the University of Edinburgh Business School, and also some from the Office of National Statistics. So firstly, 74% of freelancers have lost income, and by an average of 76%. So in short, the majority of freelancers have lost the majority of their income. 69% have had cash flow problems. Previously, this was just 10% prior to COVID-19. So it's effectively jumped from 1 in 10 to nearly 7 in 10. 19% expect to cease trading completely because of COVID-19. So nearly 1 in 5 are going to stop trading. And finally, the Office of National Statistics reported that between April 3rd to April 30th, compared with just 22% of employees, 60% of self-employed people saw their income fall. So in that short period, the majority of self-employed saw their income fall. This is only around 1 in 5 for employed individuals. So these are very alarming statistics of how COVID-19 has had a disproportionate impact financially on self-employed. Only last week, the Treasury Committee, chaired by MP Mel Strides, published a document that highlighted these self-employed groups missing out on support that we just discussed, and also urged the government to resolve this. Some of the solutions offered seems fair and practical, including one, a limited company directors that was proposed by IPSE. It was also highlighted in the document that Rishi Sunak stated that he would do whatever it takes to protect jobs, incomes, and keep as many as in employment. But this promise, as it stands, has not been extended to many of these self-employed individuals we just mentioned. Fingers crossed, it will be a case of better late than never, and the eligibility criteria is expanded to include these groups. So although at this stage, I'm not too hopeful, but yeah, fingers crossed. Moving on to current market insights with Jo.
Okay, so quickly then covering current market insights, and conscious that time's going on. Just wanted to give you a quick overview of the current market conditions as they relate to the contract and freelance market. An article published, I think it was last week in the FT, confirmed the OECD predicts a deeper recession for the UK than other advanced economies, predicting that as a minimum, really based on a single wave, the economy will contract by 11.5% in 2020. Looking to the recruitment industry, APSCO, the Association of Professional Staffing Companies, in their recruitment trend snapshot for June 2020, they state that contract vacancies are down 56% from the May 2019 figures, and placements are down 50%. However, permanent recruitment took an even harder hit, with figures down 66% for vacancies and 59% for placements. The REC report in their May 2020 jobs outlook that overall employer confidence reached a record low in May. However, the forecast demand for temporary workers remained relatively high both in the short and medium term. The same report also confirmed that forecast demand did remain high for temporary workers within certain sectors. So, for example, engineering and technical, legal and HR, and driving, I should potentially would expect that remains high also. Whilst we're certainly experiencing a sharp drop in available contracts, our own conversations with the recruitment industry and industry bodies does show some hesitant optimism, and some reporting an increase in positive conversations that they're having with end hirers. So as the lockdown measures are now beginning to ease, we appear to be seeing some green shoots. There's some positivity out there.
Thanks, Jo. So looking at everything that we've discussed so far, what do we think the future holds for freelancers? So firstly, we've spoken about the promises made in the Good Work Plan to align employment and tax status, which we think is a fair and right thing to do. However, this seems further away than ever with the 2021 off-payroll reforms and the creation of zero rights employees. However, the House of Lords and many professional bodies, including IPSE, have highlighted the inherent unfairness of limited company directors being treated as employed for tax purposes only. So we are hopeful that this will be addressed. It's only right that two workers paying the same amount of tax and working in similar ways receive the same statutory rights and protections. We can see freelancers becoming increasingly agile. So I think freelancers in general are a very agile workforce. They've shown that they can react and adapt to changes, and we believe this could now extend also to the business structures in which they work. So, for example, a contractor in the past may have become accustomed to switching from assignment to assignment and working with different end clients. Post IR35 reform, they may also need to be able to switch between the business structures they use. So, for example, they may need to work for the limited company for one assignment and then provide the services for an umbrella company for the next assignment. And I think the contractors that are open to doing this will immediately have a larger pool of opportunities to look at also. Next, and it definitely doesn't take a genius to say this, but we will see an increase in remote working from pre-COVID-19 levels. We're already hearing talk of the new normal and what this will look like for workplaces in general. This period, I think, has shown businesses that working remotely is not only feasible, but in many cases is more cost efficient in reducing overheads and travel expenditures, but also productive in terms of output. So remote onboarding has become the new. Teams have been able to stay connected online, and also there's less distractions of the workplace. So to what extent this norm will extend to post-coronavirus, I guess, remains to be seen, but there'll certainly be a higher proportion of it. This remote working will also extend to freelancers too, but in many cases, it can also increase the argument for using freelancers as they're independent workers. There's less need to sort of embed them into the workforce. Another thing for the future would be freelancers being key to the economic recovery. So one thing that is for sure is that freelancers have been some of the hardest hit by COVID-19, and especially highlighting those stats we saw on the COVID-19 slides. However, they will play a vital and play a significant role in the UK's economic recovery. Looking back on the last recession, contingent workers were often first to be rehired. This could likely be the case again, as there will be a lot of cautious businesses that are reluctant to committing to taking the risk of hiring permanent staff and may instead look at contractors to get the business through these difficult times. And finally, on a not so positive point, is there may well be tax and national insurance changes, which you could guess would not be positive news. When announcing the raft of measures and support to help businesses in the UK economy navigate the COVID-19 crisis, the Chancellor stated the need to recover this money. He also hinted at changes to the tax system to recoup this. So as a result, it's widely rumoured that there will be changes to the national insurance and tax system, which will impact freelancers. Although there were calls for an emergency summer budget, I think we'll probably likely have to wait until an autumn budget for confirmation of these changes. So just moving on to a Q&A.
So thanks, James, and thanks to everyone that sent in questions. We're running a little bit behind in that we only have until 5 past to answer these questions. There are quite a few. If you'd rather, as I mentioned earlier, any questions that we don't answer now, we will provide responses and we'll pass them to IPSE to pass on to you. If you'd rather ask us questions directly, of course, you can contact us via the IPSE National Freelancers Day app, or you can email us directly. There's also a few one-to-one sessions still available, I think, with myself and James, because you can book into those as well using the app. So quickly then, looking at the questions that we have. So I have my own limited company and missed out on government support. Should I apply for a bounce back loan? I've held off hoping for more support from the government. Do you have any thoughts on that, James?
Yeah, I mean, potentially if you haven't received any support thus far, you may not want to wait and rely on more support to be announced, although there are calls for further support, especially if you fall into one of the categories that we mentioned that have missed out. There's no guarantee that there will be further support announced.
I mean, just be mindful as well that it is a loan, so you know, obviously you do have to pay it back, although the interest rate's very favourable, and be wary of it generating a director's loan in the business would be my concern. I'd certainly speak to your accountant before you withdraw any of that, although you could take it as wages, of course. I know that was a very brief answer, but just another quick one. Just take one from Digital Annie. So do you have any idea of how big the increase of tax and national insurance might be? A ballpark figure that freelancers should consider? Gosh, I mean, really, my thoughts personally are that we'll probably see an increase in national insurance, which will hit freelancers in addition to potentially limited company directors, but I've got no idea what that will be at this stage. It would be disappointing if, given the fact the government hasn't done enough really, in our opinion, to help freelancers, that it disproportionately affected the freelancer community, but at this stage it's really difficult. Any thoughts, James?
Yeah, I mean, it would be hard to predict it until we know for sure what the debts will be as well. So what we don't yet know for sure how much support is going to be provided between now and the sort of end of the year. And so, for example, if the government also don't know how many people are going to be applying for sort of the flexible furloughing, so they don't yet know what the cost of all of the COVID-19 support is. I guess once they've sort of looked at that and then they've got an idea of what we need to do to balance the books, that will probably come into consideration for when they roll out any tax and NI changes.
Just in response to Lucy, who has joined a little bit late, yes, the talk will be available afterwards for delegates. I believe it will be sent out via email, so you can watch it at your leisure.
So we've now gone past the 9:05 point, so we're going to have to wrap up the webinar. But we can answer any questions that we've had that we haven't been able to answer. So we'll provide an answer to IPSE. Alternatively, you can get in touch with us via the IPSE app, or our emails should be on screen now. So just feel free to let us know if you have any questions and we'll be happy to help. So thanks for joining everyone. We hope you enjoy the rest of National Freelancers Day.